Your mother didn't fall, the old housekeeper whispered, gripping Amara's wrist so tight it hurt, her eyes darting down the corridor like the walls had ears. She was pushed, and the person who did it still sleeps under this roof every single night. Amara's breath left her body. She had spent 14 months telling herself it was an accident. 14 months lighting candles at the church her mother loved, going through the motions, swallowing the story the police handed her like it was gospel. 14 months visiting a grave and talking to a headstone and pretending that the version of events everyone handed her made sense. Because what was the alternative? That someone had looked at her mother, quiet, gentle, hard-working Amara Okafor, a woman who had crossed oceans to build a better life, and decided she needed to disappear. But Amara had always known. Deep in the place where African daughters keep the truths too painful to speak out loud, the place her grandmother would have called the knowing that lives in the chest, she had always known. And now she was standing in the servants' quarters of the Kwon estate, the most powerful household in the country, in a uniform she had lied and begged and forged references to wear. And this woman, this trembling woman with frightened eyes and hands that hadn't stopped shaking since she pulled Amara into the corner, was confirming every dark thought she had ever pushed down. "Who?" Amara managed to say. Her voice barely made a sound. The housekeeper, Mrs. Song, the staff called her, 30 years in this house, knew where every secret was buried, opened her mouth. Her lips parted. Amara leaned in. Then footsteps came down the hall, slow, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that cost money. Mrs. Song released her wrist and turned away so fast it was like the conversation had never happened. She picked up a folded towel and busied her hands, and her face became the practiced blank expression of a woman who had survived 3 decades in a house like this by learning when to disappear. Amara looked up, and there he was, Kwon Jaeho. He was 26 years old, and he looked like something that had been assembled specifically to make people lose their composure. Pale, smooth skin that had no business looking that perfect under fluorescent hallway lighting. A sharp jawline that could have been drawn by someone who took the concept of jawlines very seriously. Tall and slim, athletic in the way that suggested discipline rather than accident. The kind of body that existed because someone had decided mediocrity was not an option. His black hair was styled with the precision of a person who understood the details communicate power. And his eyes, dark, intense, the kind of eyes that made you feel briefly that you were the only thing in the room worth looking at, and then made you realize immediately that you were being assessed rather than admired, landed on her face and stayed there. He was wearing a luxury black business suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have never had to think about the cost of anything. The cinematic lighting of the grand hallway caught the sharp lines of him and held them. He looked, Amara thought in the single second before she corrected herself firmly, like someone had taken a K-pop idol and handed him a billion-dollar company and said, "See what you do with this." He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. "You're in the wrong wing," he said. His Korean-accented English was precise and low and completely unbothered. Again, his voice landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there, which she hated. She hated it with everything she had. She smiled her best invisible smile, the one she had practiced in the bathroom mirror for 3 weeks before her first day, the one that said, "I am nobody, I am harmless, I am just the girl who mops your floors," and she grabbed her cart and nodded once. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll sort myself out." He held her gaze for 1 second longer than necessary. Something moved behind those dark eyes. Not warmth exactly, but something that was aware of her in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. Then he turned and walked away, and the sound of those footsteps faded down the corridor until the hallway was silent again. Amara exhaled. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the cart handle with both fists, because she had just realized something that changed everything, something that rearranged the entire architecture of the plan she had spent 14 months building and 6 weeks executing, something she had not accounted for, had not prepared for, had no defense against. She was falling for him. She, Amara Okafor, daughter of Adeze, granddaughter of a woman who raised 6 children alone in Lagos and never once let a man make her foolish. She was falling for the man who might have destroyed her entire world, and she had no idea what to do with that. It had started, as most dangerous things do, with a piece of paper. Amara had found it 4 months after the funeral, tucked inside the lining of her mother's winter coat. The coat she had put off donating because she wasn't ready, because it still smelled like shea butter, and the particular warmth that only mothers carry, because grief makes you irrational in ways you don't fully understand until you're sitting on a kitchen floor at midnight, holding a coat that will never be worn again. The paper was small, folded into quarters, written in her mother's handwriting, the careful, deliberate handwriting of a woman who had learned English as her third language and treated every written word like it deserved respect. It said, "Kwon knows. If anything happens to me, start there. That was all. No name, no explanation, no elaboration on which Kwon or what exactly Kwon knew or what starting there was supposed to look like. Just 5 words and a direction." Amara had sat with that paper for 6 weeks. She had held it up to the light. She had photographed it and zoomed in and looked for anything hidden in the pressure of the pen strokes. She had called her Auntie Ngozi in Lagos at 2 a.m. and read it to her over the phone, and Auntie Ngozi had gone very quiet and then said in Igbo, "Your mother was not a careless woman. She wrote that because she meant it." She'd gone to police exactly once, and the officer behind the desk had looked at her with the particular brand of patience people reserve for grieving immigrants when they believe the grieving are simply not ready to accept reality, and he had said, "Miss Okafor, your mother's death was ruled accidental." A note this vague isn't evidence of anything except that she may have had concerns we can't verify. She walked out of that station and never went back. If the system wasn't going to help her, she would help herself. She researched the Kwon family for 3 weeks straight. Kwon Jaeho, 26, CEO of Kwon Industries, one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in the country, inherited the company at 22 when his father died under circumstances that the official record called a cardiac event and the Whisper network called something else entirely. Unmarried, notoriously private, lived alone in the family estate with a rotating staff of household employees, known for being exacting, cold, and impossible to read, which meant Amara needed to become his housekeeper. It took her 2 months to build the credentials, a forged employment history. 3 references she constructed carefully using email addresses and phone numbers she controlled. A crash course in household management from a retired domestic worker she found through a community board. A Nigerian woman named Mama Chisom, who taught her how to move through a room without being noticed, how to keep her face perfectly neutral no matter what she overheard, and how to survive in a house where the walls listened. "The one who serves is the one who sees everything," Mama Chisom told her on their last session, pressing Amara's hands between her own rough, warm ones. "Use that. But be careful, my daughter. Some houses are built on things that don't want to be found." Amara had gotten the job on a Thursday. She had cried in her car afterward, but not from relief, from the weight of what she was actually doing. From the terrifying reality that she was walking into the home of someone who might be dangerous, armed with nothing but determination, a folded piece of paper, and the particular stubbornness her mother always said she had inherited directly from their ancestors. But she thought about a days. She thought about her mother, who had saved for 11 years to leave Nigeria, who sent money home every month without fail, who cooked jollof rice every Sunday and filled whatever small apartment they lived in with the smell of home, who deserved better than an accidental death and a grave that the powerful people in this city would never once think to visit. And she got out of the car and went home to pack her things. Her first 2 months at the estate were careful and quiet and almost unbearably tense. She cleaned. She served. She learned the rhythms of the house, which hallways Jaeho walked at what hours, which rooms were locked and which doors were merely closed, which members of staff spoke freely, and which ones had the same careful blankness Mrs. Song wore like armor. She learned that Kwon Jaeho woke at 5 every morning, drank his coffee without speaking to anyone for the first 30 minutes, and conducted his first business call of the day in Korean before he had eaten anything, pacing the length of his study like a man who had never learned to be still. She learned that he had an older cousin named Hyunwoo who visited occasionally, and whose easy smile and loud laugh seemed to belong to a completely different family, as though warmth had skipped a generation and landed entirely in one person. She learned that there was an entire east wing that required a separate key card, and that only 3 people in the house had access to it. Jaeho, Mrs. Song, and a quiet man called Mr. Baek, who handled what the staff vaguely referred to as estate matters, and whose eyes, Amara decided early on, were the eyes of a man who had been asked to do things he did not enjoy and had done them anyway. She was careful. She was patient. She kept her face neutral and her movements invisible, and she filed everything she noticed into a mental cabinet she accessed only when she was alone in her small staff room, with the door locked, lying on her narrow bed staring at the ceiling with her mother's note pressed flat on the pillow beside her. But she had not accounted for the Thursday evening in her 6th week when she was mopping the corridor outside the main study, and she heard Kwon Jaeho behind the closed door say her mother's name. She froze. The mop handle was still in her hands. She stood absolutely motionless, barely breathing, and pressed every ounce of her attention through that door. "Ades Okafor," he said, then a pause. Then, in a voice that was quieter and harder to read than anything she had heard from him before, stripped of the professional control, carrying something underneath it that she couldn't immediately name, "I know what you're going to say, and I'm telling you that file stays closed." She didn't hear the response. He must have been on the phone. She heard only his side, clipped, controlled, but tight at the edges in the way of a man gripping something that was trying to get away from him. "It was handled," he said. "It's been handled. Don't call me about this again." Then silence, then footsteps moving toward the door. Amara moved faster than she had ever moved in her life, cart and all, around the corner and into the adjacent hallway, pressing her back against the wall and squeezing her eyes shut and breathing through her mouth in the careful way Mama Chisholm had taught her. In for 4, out for 4, keep the body quiet even when the mind is screaming. It was handled. She stood there in the dark hallway for a very long time after his footsteps faded. She had come here looking for answers. She was starting to find them, and they were so much worse than she had imagined. Now here is where you need to pay very close attention, because what happens next is the part that changes everything. If Amara's story has been keeping you on the edge, if you are already feeling the weight of what she is carrying, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you do not miss the moment the story finally cracks open, because the truth about what happened to Adeze Okafor goes deeper than anyone in that house is ready for, and we are just getting started. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday. Not planned. Amara had not planned it. She had promised herself she would be patient, methodical, that she would gather everything she needed before she made a single move. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But then she walked into the study to return a book she had found left on the dining table, and Jaeho was standing at his desk with his back to her, and on the surface in front of him, spread open like it had been recently and repeatedly reviewed, was a file. And at the top of the file, in plain black letters, was her mother's name. "You have her file," Amara said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. The words came out of a place beyond decision-making, beyond strategy, beyond 14 months of careful containment and 2 months of invisible labor, and every lesson Mama Chisholm had ever taught her about keeping her face still. Jaeho turned around slowly. He was backlit by the floor-to-ceiling window behind his desk, and the late afternoon light caught the sharp lines of his face in a way that was almost unfair given the circumstances. He looked at her. He looked at the file. He looked back at her, and something shifted behind those dark, intense eyes. Something that in any other context she might have described as the look of a man who had been caught, but that immediately, visibly, deliberately hardened into something controlled and unreadable. "Close the door," he said. "Why do you have a file on my mother?" He was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. She counted. She would count them in her memory for a very long time afterward. "You said your last name was Okafor," he said. "It is. Adeze Okafor was your mother." It wasn't a question, and the way he said it, with recognition, with weight, with something underneath the words that moved like grief or something adjacent to it, told her that he had known. Maybe not from the very first day, but he had known. "Tell me what happened to her," Amara said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it for being steady, because every other part of her was not. "Tell me right now, or I walk out of this house and I go straight to every journalist whose contact information I have spent the last 3 months collecting, and I tell them that Kwon Jaeho has a file on a woman who died under suspicious circumstances connected to this estate." Something moved across his face. Not fear. Something more complicated and more costly than fear. "She worked for us," he said carefully. "Years ago, before you were employed here, before I was running this company, she worked for my father." The floor felt different under Amara's feet, like it was reorganizing itself. "Your father," she repeated. "My father," he said, and now his voice had something in it she had not expected, had not prepared for, had no strategy to handle, something that sounded impossibly like grief that had been living in a locked room for years and was tired of being locked in. "She found something she wasn't supposed to find, and my father—" He stopped. He pressed his hand flat against the desk like he needed something solid underneath him. "My father was not the man the public believed him to be." Amara stared at him. "He had her removed from the estate," Jaeho continued, and each word sounded like it was being pulled from somewhere painful. "I was 16. I didn't understand what was happening. I knew something was wrong. I knew because she left without saying goodbye, and your mother was not the kind of woman who left without saying goodbye. But I didn't know the full extent of what he'd ordered until after he died, until I started going through his private records, until I found—" He looked at the file. His jaw tightened. "I've spent 4 years trying to understand everything that happened, trying to find a way to make it right without destroying what is left of my family's name. And then you walked through my door with her last name and her eyes, and I—" He stopped again. "I didn't know whether to tell you everything or protect you from it." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Amara had ever experienced. "You knew who I was," she said finally. "Yes, and you said nothing. I was trying to figure out how." She laughed. It came out wrong, jagged and raw and full of 14 months of something that had no place left to go. "You were trying to figure out how," she repeated. "I wore a maid's uniform and lied about my entire employment history and scrubbed floors in your house for 6 weeks trying to find out what happened to my mother, and you were just trying to figure out how to tell me." "Amara, don't!" She held up a hand. The sound of her name in his mouth, in that voice with that weight behind it. She could not afford to feel what that did to her right now. "Don't say my name like that right now." He didn't. She stood there in the middle of his study, in her uniform, with her cart still in the hallway, and her whole carefully constructed plan dissolving around her like it had been made of something that was never built to last. She had come here for answers. She was getting them, and they were so different from what she had imagined, so much more tangled, so much more human, so much less clean, that she didn't know what to do with the shape of them. She thought about her mother. She thought about Amara Okafor standing in a house like this, in a uniform like this, finding something she wasn't supposed to find. She thought about what it must have cost her. She thought about 5 words written on a folded piece of paper and tucked into the lining of a coat like a message in a bottle thrown into an ocean her daughter would one day have to cross alone. "Tell me everything," Amara said. Her voice cracked on the last word and she let it. She was done performing steadiness. "From the beginning, all of it. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how bad it is. She was my mother. She crossed an ocean to give me a better life, and she deserved better than what she got. And the least you can do, the absolute least, is give me the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment something in his face changed in a way she had not seen before and would not forget after. The cold expression softening, not into weakness, but into something more honest, like a door opening that had been closed for a very long time. Then he pulled out the chair across from his desk. "Sit down," he said quietly, "please," and she sat, because she had not come this far to leave without what she came for, and because something in the way he said please, like it was a word he had to reach for, like warmth was a language he was still learning to speak, told her that whatever came next he was going to tell her every word of it. She had walked into this house to find who killed her mother. She had not expected to find a man who had been living with the same question. She had not expected to find someone who looked like that and carried grief like this and said her name like it meant something. And she had absolutely not expected to find herself sitting across from him in the fading light of a Wednesday evening, trying very hard not to feel the thing she was already feeling. But that was the thing about truth. It never arrived the way you imagined. It arrived the way it wanted to, complicated and completely inconvenient, accompanied by things you didn't ask for and couldn't give back. Amara folded her hands in her lap. Her mother's voice came to her, the way it sometimes did in the quiet moments, low and certain and carrying the particular authority of a woman who had survived more than most. The truth always finds a way to the surface, Nin. Your job is to still be standing when it does. She was still standing, and she listened. If this story is living rent-free in your head right now, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next chapter, and drop a comment telling us, do you trust Jaeho, or do you think Amara is walking straight into another trap? Because the person truly responsible for what happened to Amara Okafor is still in that house, still watching, still very confident that they've gotten away with it. And they have absolutely no idea what Amara Okafor is capable of when she is fighting for her mother.